This is Bonnie Bucqueroux, and welcome to week 1 of Creative Photography, a free online course in photography offered through the Creative Careers Institute. And the week 1 assignment for this week is going to be on street photography. I had told you that all of our weekly assignments are going to be divided into 3 areas: inspiration, perspiration, and conceptualization. So let's talk a little bit about the inspiration for street photography. Who are the examples of excellence? Where did street photography come from? Where is it going? Where does it stand today? I'm fascinated by this kind of photography because what it does is it captures real life moment by moment. The challenge of the photographer is to try to capture that peak moment, the candid moment, the moment when the subject is maybe unaware, or maybe they're just posing in a sort of casual way for the photographer just in a moment. Here, stop, mind if I take a picture? That kind of street photography. Street photography didn't exist at the beginning of photography. When we think about those early cameras, as with a lot of different kinds of photography, the technology allowed us to move into new areas and use cameras in new ways. Early cameras were pinhole cameras. They didn't even have a lens. And you could take an image, but it took an extraordinarily long time to expose the silver on the paper or the plates inside the camera in order to be able to capture something that you could process later and see. Or then we moved to those big box cameras where the photographer put the drape over his head in order to block out all the light so he could see, and he'd see the image upside down inside, and he would take the picture, and the people on the other side would have to stand still for a minute or two or all the pictures would be blurry. Then we moved with additional technology to the flash powder in those big trays where they'd blow it off and you'd be lucky if you didn't lose your hand in the process. And then finally they invented flash photography. But as cameras became smaller and easier to use, and the film became faster, and the lenses became faster so they could get the light to the film more quickly, it was possible that the camera could be lifted off the tripod. It didn't have to be big and cumbersome. It didn't have to be held stationary. You could hold it in your hand and walk down the street and be able to take photographs. What happened with the 35mm camera was that they took the film stock that was used to make movies. They were using those individual frames to be able to make images. There's always been the kind of big format photography, the kind of thing that Ansel Adams does, where he captures those huge, like the Grand Tetons images that he did that are so famous, that take a look at still life, at things that aren't moving. But the challenge with street photography is that it's all done on the fly. It's all done very fast. In an instant, you're trying to capture something meaningful about what's going on in the world around you. I think that's what makes street photography so exciting. Now, the first person to really popularize street photography and make it something that set the standard, I think, for all the photographers who have come since is the French photographer Henri Cartier Bressson. And he had a Leica camera, 35mm film, a 50mm lens, a fixed focus lens, no zooming. He had to sort of move around to be able to capture what he needed. And he's arguably used this rangefinder camera. It didn't even give you exactly what it was you would get on the film through the lens. He was looking through a rangefinder. Arguably, people would still say that Henri Cartier Bressson was the finest photographer of the 21st century. Bresson had a fascinating life. He was captured by the Nazis and finally escaped. He was talking with Gandhi just a few hours before Gandhi was assassinated when India was on its way to independence. I mean, he was a person who always seemed to be in the right place at the right time to be able to capture interesting things. Amusingly, too, Bresson was not all that fond of the people who did still photography. He said, "The world is going to pieces and people like Ansel Adams and Edward Weston are photographing rocks." So he thought that there was nothing more noble than capturing what was going on in the lives of real people. Bresson was the co-founder of Magnum, the photo agency that specialized in black and white realistic photography. Available light photography still does. He says, "In photography, visual organization can stem only from a developed instinct." It's that idea that the more you practice, the better you will get, that you learn about how to capture that peak moment. He said about that peak moment, that one moment where you capture a person revealing their humanity in one way or another. Bresson said about that it is the marvelous mixture of emotion and geometry together in a single instant. One person that I want to bring to your attention, because in the inspirational section we look for examples of excellence, and we've seen some of the photography of Henri Cartier Bressson, and we've seen his look at the world. But there is also a marvelous street photographer who literally labored in obscurity from the 1950s through the 1990s without anybody ever seeing any of her work. Her name is Vivian Maier, and I have included at the Creative Careers Institute website in week 1 of the assignments a link to a little 8-minute video that explains how these photographs ever came to light. It's about a young man who found all of her negatives at a garage, well, not all of them, but hundreds of them, at a garage sale, bought them, took them home, and realized that he had a treasure trove of maybe one of the finest photographers ever to have been here in the United States, who had labored in obscurity. Nobody had ever seen any of her work. Vivian was a nanny for families. She never married. She had no social life to speak of, apparently, but she had her camera with her all the time, and she spent her time on the streets of cities, in Chicago, in New York City, and she would take images of people on the street, and they're marvelous images. If you look at the sequence of things that she's done, you can see that she had her own signature style. And that's what we're talking about. If you shoot enough of this kind of photograph, you will see if that's your kind of photography and whether it is your signature style. Do you have a specific look? I look at the images that Vivian shot, the variety of them, people in different situations. What's the story behind people lying on a beach? The moment when the woman's dress gets caught by the wind. All of these images. Take a look at the beautiful composition here where we have this woman on the street and we see her reflected in the window on the other side. And that's just such a beautiful, elegant composition. The little baby on the mother's shoulder, the young children. She had a way of just getting people to stop and look at her. I see these 3 sailors here, and for me, maybe I would have focused on just the backs of those 3 sailors. But by including the other bystanders on the street, you see the depth that she added to our understanding of what life was like and who these people were. One of the things we have to be careful about with street photography is being a bit too intrusive. Standards have changed, and we do have to be careful about being exploitive of people. This is obviously someone who was very much down on his luck, and Vivian captured images of him. But it's a situation where we want to make sure that we don't take advantage of people, but we also want to capture real life in the raw. This is my favorite image, this woman and this police officer on the street. This is my favorite Vivian Maier image. Many people have their favorites. I've given you some links to her, to websites that have captured her work because I want you to take an opportunity to look through them. I have no idea what these 2 are talking about. But there's something so poignant in that they're clasping hands, they're looking into each other's eyes. There's something going on here. Something very human, something very real. And I feel privileged that Vivian gave me an opportunity to see that. My hunch is that these people may no longer be with us, that these are people who are long gone, but they are always going to live in my memory on the basis of the photograph that she took. I see the composition that just came to her so naturally, her point of view. Where did she see people? How did she organize the shot? How far back was she? How close did she get? What did those people look like? Who were they? Some real characters too, some people who were very different, very, very different. And one of the images that she did, you notice, is an image from further away showing us a street scene. I think that's one of the ways to sort of dip your toe into street photography, is to start maybe on a busy street from a window above where people may not be as aware of you shooting that image. I love this image of the person rolling the tire down the street. What a busy street that was. How much a street teeming with life. There's this image of this woman with the one shoe and the other person standing on their head, standing in front of Strip-O-Rama. Now there's a story there. I'm not sure what the story is, but it's certainly a story I'd like to know more about. I see this young girl. I don't know if this young girl is still with us anymore. This was so many years ago, but we have a glimpse into her life. This woman who's probably gone by now as well. And there's a story here with a guy with the no pants. I'm not sure what the story is, but I sure would like to know. And I'm glad that Vivian captured it and gave it to us. I focus a bit on this image of the woman in there with the telephone, because if you look, there's a faint reflection in that glass of the telephone booth where we can see Vivian. She's standing there with her camera, taking that image. And it shows that bond between the photographer and the subject, especially in street photography, where there's that sort of momentary connection between the two that is captured forever on that image. Some people would call that a flaw in the photograph. In this case, I think it adds a lot to the image. Now, Vivian Maier was not the only famous person to do these kinds of candid, real-life, raw and gritty type of photography. In fact, some of it gets pretty gritty. Diane Arbus captured people on the street, very famous. We see people that we might not have seen otherwise, whose lives were somewhat hidden away. This image of this young boy holding the toy grenade is very famous. And one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, how is that different than just a snapshot? A grenade is very famous. And one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, how is that different than just a snapshot? Many of us take snapshots, families, friends, and they're just sort of the person centered in the image, and we just try to get them, or maybe we even make the mistake of cutting them off at the knees. And it's just a snapshot, and it's only of value to the people around us in our family, the people who know the person in those images. What makes this image stand out as something more than a snapshot, that makes it artistic, that makes it something worth sharing to a wider audience? We see her work with twins and triplets. And what distinguishes that as art in a way that a simple photograph is not? Those are some of the questions we have to ask ourselves about where those lines are. I also include this one image from Susan Mieselas' book, Carnival, which is a brilliant book of her images. I've owned the book for a while myself. It's a kind of dog-eared copy. And she was in the 1970s spending time with these women who traveled with these traveling carnival shows. And I think she went in with the idea that she might be, sort of looking at victims of the system. And what she found was these were women who had incredible power. They had the power to control the audience. They felt they were the ones in control. And she gave us a glimpse of their lives in a way that people hadn't before. These kinds of lives were not open for public view. And so she used her camera to sort of intrude into worlds that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. So I wanted to make sure, if you go to the website and you go to week 1 of our creative photography class, there's an 8 or 9 minute clip, just an audio clip of Susan Mieselas explaining this project and how she did this work. Another very famous 35mm available light street photographer was Garry Winogrand. And brilliant images, just interesting images, the kind that always leave you wanting to learn more about the people that you're looking at in these various images. In the civil rights movement, this is an image by Declan Hahn, who was at that time, I believe, with Life magazine or Black Star. And he captured some of the civil rights movement and brought us images of people who were on the street for a reason. They were there trying to make a change in their world. I took some images this year myself at some of the Occupy movement in downtown Lansing. And one of the first challenges and one of the sort of jarring things is, well, color, does color work for street photography? How does that change that whole ethos? We think of it as more of a black and white thing. What if we make it black and white? Is that the way we should render these images? Remember, we talked about the course being divided into inspiration, and this, I hope, has been inspirational for you to show you some of the better photographs of people who are really talented at this. And the second element is perspiration. Your assignment for this week is to go out and shoot some street photography, whether it's from a distance, a bit removed, as we see some of the photographers doing, or whether it's right up in your face. One of the things we need to think about in terms of conceptualization is, what are the legalities about shooting street photography? In this week's assignments, you'll see a link to a blog in the New York Times that talks about the criminalization of photojournalism, that all too often photographers in this post-911 world are finding themselves shuffled out of the way by the police when something's happening on the street, things they should be legally allowed to photograph. So let's go over a little bit of the rules of what are the rules of the road. In a post-911 world, can you just go out and shoot on the street? Well, the good news is, and I get no money from this, so I'm just passing this along for the value of it, Petapixel, which is a website, sells these nice little gray card, black card, white cards so you can calibrate your camera. And it also includes photographers' rights. And one of the things you find out is a lot of people really don't know what a photographer has the right to do. And in our society, because we are protected by the First Amendment, photographers can shoot anyone or anything in a public place unless there's a specific law against it. I recommend you don't try to get beyond the sign at Area 51, where supposedly all those UFO alien bodies are stored. Somebody's going to probably stop you there. And if a police officer puts up crime scene tape, you can't just go through the crime scene tape, because that is a legal barrier to your ability to go beyond that tape. But on a public street, you're allowed to take photographs. You can't use a zoom lens to peek into somebody's living room. That's not fair. But you can take the things that are visible to you from any public thoroughfare. You can also go into a place like a mall and start shooting photographs. If the security officers tell you you have to stop, but you don't have to give them your film. You just have to follow the rules and be able to then go ahead and leave if they're simply not going to allow you to do it. But the challenge is not being able to make the image sometimes, it's what can you do with the image afterwards. If you're taking this image for news, you're going to publish it in a newspaper, or you have a blog, then you're protected by some of the First Amendment rights about freedom of the press, although when it comes to blogging that gets a little bit murky. But photojournalism is always protected, and so it enjoys a higher level of protection for your ability to do what you want to with the image. If, however, you decide that you want to use it in an ad, that's a whole different story. If you take pictures of people smoking on the street and then you want to use it in a campaign that's anti-smoking, those people may be able to sue you if you don't get them to sign a models release. So if you're looking at using those images in a way that you may want to commercialize them later, you should always carry with you a pad of paper that includes a models release. You know, there are standard models release forms that you can get so that you can have them sign on the spot and give you some contact information if you decide you want to use the image that way. You usually have the right also to be able to use images for educational purposes, provided that you're not making any profit from the educational purpose. So think of the use of the photograph when you're shooting those photographs as well. One of the challenges nowadays, however, I will tell you, is that some people get very nervous about having their children photographed. They're concerned about their images being up on the web where others might see them. I was taking some pictures at a public park of some kids sledding, and by the time that I got the pictures of the young kids coming down on the sled, their mother was already screaming at me that what was I, a pedophile? So there are times where discretion is better than valor, and the better side of valor, and it's better to just say, okay, fine, don't worry about it, I'm not going to use these images for anything and to steal away. There are times where it doesn't pay to push it. So this concludes week one. You have your assignment, grab your camera, go to a public place. Maybe you take some images at an open air restaurant. Maybe it's a farmer's market. Maybe it's a street fair. Maybe it's just people walking across the street. Maybe you find a bridge and you take some images of people in a thoroughfare below. But you begin to explore your point of view. You begin to get an idea of how you like to compose images, how close you like to be to your subject. Do you want to be right up next to them, or do you want to be a bit more reserved? Sometimes it can be hard to find the courage to be a street photographer, especially in this era when people are a little bit more nervous about their privacy. But this is an opportunity for you to explore yourself as much as to explore the images that you will be taking. And I hope you use this to your advantage this week and break out of your comfort zone and try something a little bit more daring than maybe the images that you've taken before.